Hey guys, welcome to an all-new bonus round here on GT, the first ever bonus round from New York City, where I'm here in town in November to launch the Xbox and PlayStation 4, and we're going to get right into the 2013 VGX, which is coming up on December 7th. We're going to talk about some of the nominees this week, and with me we've got Russ from Polygon, Alex from Giant Bomb, and Steven from Kotaku.
Hey.
Guys, since all your publications are on our esteemed voting board, we should get right into it. Game of the Year, coming up here in just a couple weeks. 5 great nominees for Game of the Year, including The Last of Us, Grand Theft Auto 5, BioShock, Tomb Raider, and Super Mario 3D World. No real next-gen games on the list. Is that a surprise, Russ?
No, I didn't find that to be. I mean, let's face it. Launch of a new console, generally you don't get the best software until a year or two in. So, like, seeing a next-gen title on there, I'm not really shocked that it didn't make the list.
Now, out of all those games, did any of them have next-gen gameplay to you, Alex?
Not necessarily in gameplay. I mean, you can look at something like The Last of Us, and you can definitely see that is a game that is definitely pushing the boundaries of what that hardware is capable and willing to do. But,
Yeah.
from a gameplay perspective, all those games definitely seem like the kinds of, variations and improvements on the kinds of things we've been seeing a whole lot over the course of this last generation.
Steven, was it a good year for games this year?
Every year is a good year for games. There's always so many things to
How
play.
does it compare to others?
People are so grumpy all the time. It's such a terrible year for games. There's so many great games. By the way, maybe Mario is actually next gen in a way that we're not appreciating. The idea that you don't have to play a console game always on a television. Maybe that is a next gen idea, just not in the manner that we think.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously a lot of great games. Some of them came out earlier in the year. When you look at that lineup of games, let's get into some of them. Let's start, I guess, kind of at the beginning of the year with BioShock Infinite, which I guess was the earliest release this year. A game that I think, for me personally, when I played it, I mean, the story was sort of, really powerful, dramatic story. I think the aftertaste for some people in terms of the gameplay and whatnot was that it was, it was good, but perhaps not as good as people were hoping from an actual game mechanic standpoint. But still gets there on the Game of the Year list because it was really, an incredible story. What was your take on that game?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the story was amazing. I think when people played through it, they were really swept away by this amazing world and this amazing story and the crazy twists at the end. But as I was playing it, I also felt like gameplay-wise, it felt like a bit of a step down from where the original BioShock was.
Yeah.
So I get why it's on there. I get why it deserves to be on there. But it wasn't quite the amazing experience that I think everyone hoped it to be.
But still made the list. Alex, is it a deserving nominee for Game of the Year?
I think so. I think it's certainly one of the more exciting and thrilling adventures of the year. The combat for me was definitely like the weakest part of it, but from a storytelling perspective, there's so much going on there, and there's like the characters are such fascinating representations of different things that I definitely got very well hooked into it.
Absolutely. Steven, what was your take on BioShock Infinite?
The world is amazing. It's a really cool world to be in. You don't feel like you've been in that kind of world before. Usually a world that colorful is something that you would see more in a Nintendo game than you would see in a first-person shooter. So that part of it is cool. You were asking if it's deserving to be a Game of the Year nominee, and it's certainly one of the best games that you could play this year. But I look at some of the games that were left out, and I look at some of the independent games like Papers, Please, which
Nominated but not up for Game of the Year.
right,
Yeah.
Best Independent Game nominee, I believe. And that's a game that, to me, epitomizes the same type of risk that the first BioShock was taking, where we had a first-person shooter that was going in a direction very different from others, wasn't as about kill everything, and more about sort of know this strange world, think about the philosophies behind the world. That's not the description I would give for Papers, Please, but in the same way that BioShock kind of bucked a lot of convention and expectation there, maybe BioShock or one of these other game slots would have been better taken with one of the more daring independent games. So when I look at it and when I think about some of the reaction to BioShock Infinite, I think some of it is a backlash to not being as wowed and shocked. And if I were a Ken Levine in Irrational Games, I would say, well, you want us to reinvent the first-person shooter every time. It's an unreasonable expectation. But that's where I think that game fits, is situated. Not as daring in retrospect as we hoped it would have been.
Absolutely, and there are a lot of, to your point, there are a lot of sequels on there. I mean, Last of Us we'll get to as a new IP, but otherwise, obviously established franchises. The next one on the list is probably the most surprising one on the list is Tomb Raider, which is a game that has a pretty high Metacritic overall this year. But I think you talk to people about it, it's like, hey, great, solid game, but this is on the Game of the Year list. Why do you think it made it on there, Alex?
That's actually a game I just started playing not that long ago, so it's still pretty fresh in my memory. I think the thing that really stuck out about that game is that Tomb Raider had gotten pretty stale as a franchise. It hadn't really done anything that interesting in a long time, and you know, you can take, I could take or leave certain story decisions in that game, but like from a mechanical perspective, from a visual perspective, and just, you know, from a gameplay perspective, that is definitely like one of the most like just like addictive games I think I've probably played all year.
Right. Anyone surprised that it's on the list?
You wouldn't expect it, but it's smooth, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there were all these great like bow and arrow games. That was sort of a trend, the bridge 2012, 2013,
Yeah.
had the great bow and arrow in Far Cry 3. You had the one in Tomb Raider, Crisis 3 had a good bow and arrow as
Towerfall
well.
this year.
Good bow and arrow there. So why is there no best bow and arrow of EGX actually?
We haven't announced all the
Add the
categories.
category.
Like, so-
Okay. But yeah, but a surprise because I don't think we were expecting a Tomb Raider game to be that good. They've been getting better, but that felt like
Absolutely,
a
and
step
that's a sort of a reboot of the franchise now. The fact that, as you said, this is the first good Tomb Raider in a while. Next game on the list that came out was The Last of Us, which I think, you know, to me was probably the most affecting story in terms of sort of its, you know, dramatic weight and how it felt so different coming from Naughty Dog that had done a lot of, you know, good and Uncharted games. That was a bold game. Clearly, I think everyone would agree that it should be on the list. But Russ, what was your takeaway from The Last of Us?
Yeah, I mean, the story still sticks with me. I think it'll stick with me 5 years from now, and that's what makes these amazing games. But I go back to it, and the reason why it really stood out is because if it was just a story, it'd be one thing, but I thought they really nailed the gameplay, specifically when things went wrong. There's a lot of stealth moments in those games where you're trying to hide from the creatures, whatever they were called. And when things went wrong, it actually turned into a very different, interesting game where you're trying to manage this crowd of attackers. And that's a really tough thing to do. Most stealth games do not do that. So you had the great story, and you really had very innovative gameplay.
All right, guys, hold that thought. We'll be right back here on the bonus round.